Jason Collins, a 35-year-old night watchman, had always lived a quiet, unremarkable life. He had worked at the Global Financial Corporation headquarters for nearly 8 years. The building, a sleek glass tower, stood as a symbol of the financial empire housed within it, with hundreds of millions of dollars in assets secured behind layers of the most advanced security systems in the world. Jason's job was simple: patrol the building after hours, monitor security cameras, check for any infrastructure issues, and ensure no unauthorized person was lingering in the shadows. It was a routine he could perform with his eyes closed, and after so many years, it felt like second nature. He moved through the empty hallways, past rows of expensive offices and the shimmering glass that overlooked the city, always feeling like he was invisible, a ghost among the building's many layers of security. There was little excitement in Jason's job, but that was fine. He didn't mind the predictability of it. At 35, he had no family, no plans beyond getting through the night shifts and collecting his paycheck. But over time, something started to gnaw at him. The building's security, while impressive, had begun to feel like a game. Jason, who had always been meticulous, started noticing small flaws. A flickering camera here, a security door that didn't always lock properly there, a maintenance worker's access card left in the security room by accident. These were minor, seemingly harmless inconsistencies in the perfect system, but to Jason, they were like cracks in an otherwise impenetrable wall. One evening, as he made his usual rounds, Jason paused outside the vault room on the 47th floor. He had passed by this room hundreds of times before, never thinking much of it. The vault was the most secure part of the building, protected by layers of biometric locks, encryption systems, and physical security measures. But that night, something about it caught his attention. It wasn't the vault itself that intrigued him, but its history. He knew it contained tens of millions of dollars in cash, gold bars, and precious documents for high-profile clients. The kind of wealth that could change anyone's life. Jason had always kept his distance from it. No one in his position was supposed to even think about what was inside. But tonight was different. He stood there for a while, just staring at the heavy steel door, wondering how something so secure could be so vulnerable. If someone wanted to, could they slip through the cracks? Jason had the knowledge to understand security systems. He knew enough about coding to understand how the building's software operated, enough about the mechanics of locks and biometrics to spot a flaw when he saw one. That night, the idea planted itself in Jason's mind. What if someone could outsmart the system? What if someone like him, a lowly night watchman with access to the building's secrets, could actually pull it off? The thought lingered in his mind long after his shift ended. He knew that in theory, breaking into the vault was a nearly impossible task. The building's security had been designed by the best in the business. But Jason had never been the type to back down from a challenge. The more he thought about it, the more the idea of getting into that vault, of stealing what was inside, began to feel like something he had to do. But Jason wasn't reckless or impulsive. He knew that any heist needed a plan, meticulous, methodical, and above all, patient. He would have to watch, wait, and learn every detail of the building's security systems. He would have to find the flaws, exploit them, and stay under the radar. The perfect crime wasn't about being fast or brash. It was about being invisible. As he locked up the building for the night and headed home, Jason's mind was already working overtime. He had a plan in his head, a plan that would take time, patience, and precision. But if he could pull it off, he'd walk away with the kind of wealth that would change everything. For the first time in years, Jason felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: excitement. For the next few weeks, Jason carefully monitored the building, looking for weaknesses and opportunities. He worked his usual shifts, blending in with the routine of the night staff, while quietly taking notes on the building's security systems. Every night after his rounds, he would sit at his desk in the security room, reviewing the surveillance footage. The cameras captured the actions of every employee, from the janitors to the CEO. But Jason focused on the small details. The flickering cameras, the moments when the alarm system went into maintenance mode, the timing of the late-night shifts when security staff were the least vigilant. It was all part of the puzzle. The vault was heavily secured. Jason knew that. But he also understood that no system was entirely foolproof. He had been working at the company long enough to know that during certain hours, especially after midnight, there were fewer staff members, fewer eyes watching. The overnight shift had been routine and predictable until now. The only problem was the biometric authentication system, which had a two-step process, a physical key card and a fingerprint scan, both necessary to access the vault. Only a handful of employees were granted access, and the biometric system was considered one of the most secure in the world. But it was still possible to circumvent it. Jason thought he had seen the technicians reset the biometric system during system maintenance a few times before, and on one occasion, he had observed them bypassing the scan entirely to do a quick update. It was this moment that made him realize that, with a bit of insider knowledge, there might be a way to override it. Jason's first breakthrough came one night when he noticed Greg, the head security officer, leave his access card on the desk in the security room while he took a phone call. The card was crucial for gaining access to the vault, and Jason knew that this was the perfect opportunity. It wasn't the first time Greg had been careless, but it was the first time Jason had seen him leave the card unattended. Jason's heart raced. It was a risk, but the opportunity was too good to pass up. With the building quiet and Greg distracted, Jason carefully walked over to the desk, took the card, and slipped it into his pocket. He spent the next few minutes checking the surveillance footage, making sure no one was around to notice the small change. He breathed a sigh of relief when no one entered the security room during that time. For the next few nights, Jason laid low. He knew that taking the key card without being caught was a dangerous step, but he also knew that it was a crucial one. With it, he could gain access to the vault when the time was right. The key card alone wouldn't be enough to open the vault. He still needed to bypass the biometric system, but it was a start. Jason spent the next few shifts observing the biometric terminal, noting the specific sequence of steps required to activate the scan. His understanding of the system grew. He realized that during maintenance checks, there were brief windows where the biometric scan was inactive. He had also noticed that the system's backup keycard reader occasionally malfunctioned, allowing the system to accept a physical keycard in place of the biometric scan. This was the opening Jason had been waiting for. He didn't need to bypass the biometric system entirely. He just needed to exploit the weak spots during these windows of vulnerability. Jason's plan began to take shape. He would use Greg's access card, bypass the biometric system when it was temporarily inactive, and then quietly enter the vault. It would have to be done quickly, and there could be no mistakes. Every step had to be calculated, and Jason knew that one slip-up could ruin everything. He continued his routine, moving with more purpose than ever before. Jason began to feel a sense of confidence in his ability to pull off the heist. He had the access card, the knowledge of the system's vulnerabilities, and the patience to wait for the right moment. Now it was just a matter of executing the plan. Every night, Jason's steps grew more deliberate, more certain. He wasn't just a night watchman anymore. He was a man on a mission, and he was beginning to see the heist as more than just an opportunity. It was an obsession. It was the one thing that had filled the empty spaces in his life, and he could feel the tension building. The heist was within his reach, and soon Jason would see if he had the nerve to pull it off. As Jason's understanding of the building's security systems deepened, he knew that careful observation and steady patience would be the key to his success. The vault, though seemingly impregnable, had become an obsession, something Jason couldn't stop thinking about. Each shift, he became more attuned to the patterns of behavior within the building: who worked late, when the janitorial staff made their rounds, and when the security officers were on their breaks. But more importantly, Jason started identifying the people who could help him pull off the heist. People who might unknowingly provide him with crucial information. His first key contact came from the IT department. One of the junior technicians, Alex, often worked late into the night, fixing small issues with the building's network. Jason didn't know much about Alex, but he had noticed him a few times while walking through the halls during his patrols. Alex was often at his desk, hunched over a screen, muttering to himself. His presence was mostly unnoticed by the rest of the employees, a background character in the daily operation of the building. But Jason knew that if he played his cards right, Alex could prove valuable. One night, while on his regular rounds, Jason decided to approach Alex. He made sure the timing was right, waiting until the building was mostly quiet. When he saw Alex walking toward the break room, Jason followed at a discreet distance, making sure to keep his presence unnoticed. As Alex sat down at the table, Jason sat opposite him, casually striking up a conversation. At first it was small talk about the long hours, the difficult work, but Jason soon steered the conversation toward the building's security systems. Alex, tired and eager to share, started talking about the frequent issues he had with the vault security software. "The thing is," Alex said, "the biometric system's not perfect. It's glitchy sometimes. Sometimes the terminal freezes up during maintenance, and that's when we can access the backup system. The keycard reader works fine then, but if anyone's not careful, it can be a bit risky." Jason seized on the opportunity. He nodded thoughtfully, listening to every word. "I didn't realize that," he replied. "I thought the system was foolproof." "Foolproof?" Alex laughed bitterly. "Hardly. It's not about security. It's about convenience. They want everything to run smoothly, so when the software is down, they don't care about security. They just want to get it working again quickly. No questions asked." Jason's mind raced. This was the opening he needed. While Alex's revelations were valuable, Jason knew better than to push too hard. He didn't want to raise suspicion. He thanked Alex for the information and promised to let him get back to work. But Jason's plan was solidifying more and more with each passing day. Next, Jason turned his attention to Greg, the head security officer. Greg had become a crucial part of Jason's growing network, and Jason had been careful not to rush the relationship. Over the weeks, he'd made casual small talk with Greg, offering to cover shifts when Greg needed a break and providing small favors. Greg, in turn, had grown more comfortable around Jason, often sharing small details about the vault's security and his own responsibilities. One evening, after Jason had filled in for Greg during a particularly quiet night, Greg opened up a little more than usual. "I don't know how anyone could ever get past the vault security," Greg said with a chuckle. "They've got the biometric system, the physical key cards, alarm surveillance. It's a fortress in there." Jason nodded, appearing to agree. "Yeah, it seems like no one could get through that without a lot of help." Greg shrugged. "Maybe, but I'll tell you this. During maintenance, we've had to deal with some of those systems not syncing right. It doesn't happen often, but if someone was savvy, they could probably work their way in while no one was looking." Jason took note of Greg's words, and as the days went on, he refined his plan. The pieces were coming together. He now knew that the key card and the maintenance window were crucial, but he still needed to learn more about the physical layout of the vault room itself. How could he move undetected? What were the precise steps in entering and exiting the vault? One day, Jason had an idea. He'd always been meticulous about his rounds, checking every corner of the building. He began taking extra care to observe the layout of the upper floors, paying close attention to the path security officers took to reach the vault room. He noted the timing of their patrols and studied the gaps in the security camera's coverage. Through his observations, Jason realized that there was a small service elevator hidden in a corner of the building, which was rarely used by the security team. It was a narrow industrial elevator used for maintenance and deliveries, and it was only accessible via a key card. Jason knew that if he could gain access to this elevator, it could serve as an escape route during the heist. Jason's ability to gather and synthesize information had become his greatest asset. He had gathered knowledge about the building's vulnerabilities, from the software glitches to the hidden paths that could be exploited. He'd established connections with Greg and Alex, learning critical information about the vault's security flaws without raising suspicion, and he had identified the key areas of weakness: the maintenance window for the biometric system, the overlooked service elevator, and Greg's carelessness with the access card. Now Jason was ready to begin the final phase of his plan. All he needed was the right timing and the perfect opportunity. With each passing day, Jason's confidence grew. He had gathered the key pieces of information he needed to pull off the heist: details about the building's security flaws, timing windows, and escape routes. But his plan wasn't just about knowing how to get in. It was about knowing when, and most importantly, how to get out without leaving a trace. Jason's next step was to obtain the one thing he needed most: the key card. He had spent weeks watching Greg, observing his habits and learning the ins and outs of Greg's schedule. The next time Greg left the key card unattended, Jason would be ready. But he had learned to be patient. He knew Greg was a creature of habit and that there was no point in rushing things. It was only a matter of time before Greg let his guard down. Jason's opportunity came one evening when Greg stayed late to work on some reports. Jason had already been in the security room, casually reviewing surveillance footage, when Greg stepped away to grab a cup of coffee. The key card sat on the desk, completely unguarded. Jason's heart raced, but he knew he had to remain calm. He stood up slowly, ensuring that the motion sensors in the security room wouldn't detect him. With deliberate care, Jason walked over to the desk, making sure to keep his footsteps soft on the floor. He reached for the key card, his hands steady, and slipped it into his pocket. As he sat back down, he glanced at the cameras on the monitors, making sure no one was watching. The last thing he needed was to raise suspicion. Greg returned a few moments later, completely unaware that his key card had been taken. Jason, ever so careful, slipped out of the security room and continued with his rounds. The key card was now in his possession, and Jason felt a sense of triumph. But he knew that this was only one part of the puzzle. The key card alone wouldn't guarantee success. He still needed to ensure that the biometric system would be temporarily disabled during the right window, and that the vault's physical security wouldn't trigger any alarms. Jason's next step was to continue gathering intel. He spent the following night studying the timing of the maintenance windows, those brief moments when the biometric system was down for updates or recalibrations. From his research, Jason knew that these updates typically occurred on Wednesdays and Thursdays, between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., when the building was mostly empty. During these hours, the building's network would enter a low-security mode, allowing for system updates without triggering alarms. This was when Jason would strike. But timing wasn't the only challenge. Jason had learned the hard way that security cameras weren't the only threat. The vault was equipped with motion sensors designed to detect unauthorized movements and alert the security team. After much observation, Jason realized that these motion sensors could be temporarily disabled for routine maintenance, just like the biometric system. However, this downtime only lasted for about 10 minutes each night, which meant Jason had to move quickly once the system was deactivated. Jason spent the following days preparing for the heist. He refined his escape plan, using the service elevator as his route out of the building. He knew that this elevator, used for deliveries and maintenance, wouldn't be tracked by the building's security system if he kept a low profile. He also took time to gather the necessary tools: a small duffel bag to carry the stolen cash and documents, a pair of gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints, and a small flashlight to navigate the vault in case the lights went out during the operation. On the night of the heist, Jason double-checked his equipment and made sure he was mentally prepared. The building was quieter than usual, and the shift felt like it could be the night he had been preparing for. He knew that once he entered the vault, there would be no turning back. The stakes were high, but Jason felt ready. As the hours ticked down to 2:20 a.m., Jason grew more focused. He watched the clock in the security room, his eyes darting between the surveillance feeds and the time on the screen. He knew that when the clock hit 2 a.m., the building's systems would enter maintenance mode, and the biometric security would be temporarily deactivated. This was his window of opportunity. Jason silently moved through the building, avoiding the main hallways and sticking to the back stairwells. His keycard opened doors without a sound, and his movements were swift but controlled. As he reached the vault door, his heart was pounding in his chest. He checked the time on his watch. 2:01 a.m. The biometric system was down. This was it. Jason approached the vault door and inserted the key card into the reader. The door clicked open with a soft hiss, and Jason stepped inside. The vault room was dark and cool, the air thick with the scent of paper and metal. He moved quickly, scanning the shelves of cash, gold, and sensitive documents. His eyes settled on the stacks of cash, tens of millions of dollars, neatly arranged in rows. But it wasn't just the money that caught his attention. Jason knew that the documents containing sensitive corporate data and high-profile client information could fetch an even higher price on the black market. Jason began stuffing cash and documents into the duffel bag. He worked quickly, knowing he had only a limited amount of time before the security system rebooted and the building returned to full alert. The adrenaline coursed through him, but he stayed focused on the task at hand. Each move was deliberate. He didn't want to make any noise or cause a disturbance that could alert security. With his bag now full, Jason moved toward the door. He could hear the faint hum of the elevator in the distance. He stepped out of the vault, quickly securing the door behind him. The vault was still locked, and Jason felt a brief moment of relief. He'd done it. Jason felt the rush of success surge through him as he made his way back down the hallway. The bag of stolen cash and documents weighed heavily on his shoulder, but he couldn't afford to waste time savoring the victory. He had planned this moment for months, but he still had a long way to go before he could consider the heist a success. Every step now felt like it could be his last, and any mistake could undo everything. He retraced his steps carefully, moving through the dimly lit hallways as quietly as possible. The building felt eerily still at this hour, and the occasional hum of the air conditioning system was the only sound that accompanied him. Jason's focus was laser sharp as he approached the service elevator. This was the part of the plan that made him the most nervous. The elevator was his only escape route, and if anything went wrong here, it could blow the entire operation. Jason inserted the key card into the service elevator, and the doors opened without a sound. He stepped inside, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one had followed him. The elevator's soft hum filled the space as it descended, and Jason felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had made it this far, and now the hardest part was over. As the elevator reached the ground floor, Jason's heart pounded. He had to be quick. There were still cameras in the lower levels of the building, and the security team could be monitoring the feeds anytime. The last thing he wanted was to be caught leaving the building with a bag full of stolen goods. He stepped out of the elevator and walked briskly toward the rear exit, keeping his head down to avoid any unwanted attention. The exit door was locked, but Jason knew exactly how to open it. He had studied the security measures carefully and had memorized the override codes for every locked door in the building. He swiped the key card and input the code he had written down from his earlier observations. The door clicked open, and Jason stepped outside into the cool night air. For a moment he paused, letting the quiet of the city settle around him. He had done it, but he wasn't out of the woods yet. The city streets were still bustling with activity, and Jason knew that the stolen money and documents could lead to dangerous consequences if he wasn't careful. He needed to get rid of the evidence as quickly as possible. The bag in his hands was a ticking time bomb, and he couldn't risk keeping it for long. Jason had already arranged for a series of safe houses where he could lay low for a while. The next step of his plan was to get to the first location, where he would stash the stolen goods and disappear for a few days to let the heat die down. He moved quickly through the darkened streets, keeping to the alleys and side roads to avoid being spotted by any passing cars or pedestrians. It took nearly an hour to reach the first safe house, a small apartment in a nondescript building on the outskirts of the city. Jason entered the building and made his way to the apartment on the top floor. The landlord, a man he had paid off weeks earlier, wasn't there to ask any questions. Jason unlocked the door and stepped inside, quickly securing the bag of stolen money in a hidden compartment under the floorboards. The place was small, but it would serve its purpose. Just a temporary hiding spot until he could figure out his next move. Jason took a deep breath as he surveyed the apartment. He had just pulled off one of the most audacious heists anyone had ever seen, and yet the sense of victory felt oddly hollow. He'd done everything right, followed every step of his plan without a hitch, and yet there was a nagging feeling in the back of his mind. It wasn't fear, but something deeper, an unease about what would come next. He couldn't rest on his laurels just yet. There was still the matter of laundering the money, selling the documents, and making sure that no one connected the dots back to him. But for the first time in a long while, Jason felt a sense of accomplishment. His heart, however, remained uneasy. He was living on borrowed time, and Jason knew that it was only a matter of time before someone, whether a colleague, an investigator, or the law, started putting the pieces together. But for now, he had succeeded. The money was safe, and the vault's secrets were in his hands. Jason sat down at the small table in the corner of the apartment and allowed himself a moment of reflection. He knew that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Tomorrow he would begin moving the money, making sure it passed through several layers of laundering operations before it became untraceable. But tonight, he allowed himself to enjoy the thrill of pulling off the perfect heist. He couldn't deny the rush, the sense that he had outsmarted an entire system designed to be unbreakable. And in that moment, Jason felt unstoppable. The days following Jason's first heist felt like a blur. He moved quickly, making sure to cover his tracks. The stolen cash and documents were in the process of being laundered, passed from one small-time contact to the next, ensuring that by the time they reached their final destination, they would be untraceable. Jason had learned quickly that the money wasn't the only thing that needed careful handling. His every move had to be discreet. The risk of getting caught was always present, and the stakes were higher than ever. But despite his efforts to stay hidden, the company was already starting to notice discrepancies. Jason had watched from the shadows as a team of external investigators was brought in to examine the vault security breach. The management team seemed on edge, and Jason could feel the tension growing. He knew they were close, too close for comfort. There had been a glitch in the system, and the company was scrambling to understand how someone had breached their most secure vault. The external security firm they'd hired had already begun looking into all access logs, identifying any unusual patterns in keycard activity, and scrutinizing the building's security footage. Jason stayed away from the office for the first few days, keeping a low profile. He'd taken a week off to let things cool down and give him time to move the money further through his network. But as the investigation progressed, Jason began to notice small changes in the building's operations. There were more security personnel stationed at every entry point. The doors to the vault were being checked with greater frequency, and the maintenance team had been given new instructions to monitor the biometric systems more closely. Even the security cameras seemed to be more active, with additional cameras installed in areas that hadn't previously been monitored as rigorously. The building was under lockdown, and Jason knew it wouldn't be long before they started searching for answers. The investigation was ramping up, and Jason's careful, methodical plan was starting to look more like a high-risk gamble. His worst fear came true one evening while he was on his shift. As he made his usual rounds, he overheard a conversation in the security room between Greg and another officer. Greg, usually so confident, now looked uneasy. "There's something off about the vault security," Greg said, his voice tense. "We've been through the footage, and there's no obvious sign of tampering. But I don't know. The system is acting up, and we're getting more alerts than usual. It's as if someone knows how to work around the system without triggering alarms." Jason's heart skipped a beat. It was exactly what he had feared. The investigation was getting too close. Greg continued, "The higher-ups want us to increase our patrols. No one goes near the vault without being logged, no exceptions. We're supposed to monitor all employees' keycard activity and keep a closer eye on the maintenance staff. They're bringing in extra people for the next few nights." Jason's pulse quickened. He had to act fast. The last thing he wanted was for his identity to be exposed before he had a chance to fully cover his tracks. The investigation into the vault wasn't just a minor inconvenience anymore. It was becoming a serious threat to his operation. He couldn't afford to take chances. Jason had to move quickly. He knew that the stolen goods were still in the safe house, but he couldn't keep them there for much longer. The security firm was bound to be combing through every detail, looking for patterns, anomalies, anything that could point them toward the thief. The more time passed, the greater the risk. Jason decided to accelerate his plans. He moved the money and documents to a new location, this time using a trusted contact from his past, someone who could safely store and launder the money without drawing attention. He didn't want to take any chances with the network he had already set up. He needed to put more distance between the heist and the stolen goods. But the key to his success would be to keep everything moving and stay a step ahead. He also realized that he couldn't afford to return to the building for a while. His presence was becoming too noticeable. He had always kept a low profile, but now the increased security meant that even the smallest oversight could draw suspicion. If anyone noticed his movements or realized he was in the building more often than usual, it could all fall apart. Jason spent the next several days keeping a low profile, staying in contact with his laundering network and monitoring the situation from the outside. He knew that he needed time for the heat to die down, so he used the opportunity to put more of the stolen assets into untraceable investments, converting the money into something less obvious. Anonymously purchased art, cryptocurrency, and other hard-to-trace commodities. Meanwhile, back at the building, the investigation was heating up. The external security firm had completed their initial assessments and found no clear breach of the physical vault's integrity. Still, they had flagged several unusual keycard access logs, including Jason's own. They were beginning to wonder if there was someone inside the company who had the knowledge and the access to execute such a sophisticated operation. The investigators were starting to hone in on the night staff, and Jason knew it was only a matter of time before they took a closer look at his movements. The walls were closing in. He had to remain invisible, blending into the background. The success of his heist now hinged on one thing: time. If he could lie low long enough for the investigation to lose momentum, he could get away clean. But if the investigators found out too soon, everything would come crashing down. Jason wasn't one to panic, but he could feel the pressure mounting. His perfectly executed plan had been threatened by an unexpected wave of scrutiny. He was still in control, but his window of opportunity was closing, and he knew that the longer he waited, the higher the risk. The next step was crucial. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The increasing pressure from the ongoing investigation had Jason on edge. Every small change in his routine, every unfamiliar face in the building, made him more paranoid. The heightened security was the first sign that things were spiraling out of control. But it wasn't just the security upgrades that worried him. It was the sudden attention he was receiving. One evening, as he entered the building for his shift, Jason noticed a slight change in the atmosphere. The usual hum of the building felt off. There was an air of suspicion that hadn't been there before. He passed several guards he didn't recognize, their eyes scanning him more carefully than usual. Jason knew they weren't looking for him directly, but something in their demeanor made him uneasy. Later that night, as he passed the security room, he overheard a conversation that froze him in his tracks. Greg, the head of security, was talking to one of the investigators from the external security firm. Jason could only catch snippets of their conversation, but it was enough to make his blood run cold. Greg was saying, "The key card activity looks odd. Someone was accessing areas that only senior staff should have access to. We've been monitoring the logs, and there's a pattern emerging. Whoever it is, they're trying to be discreet, but they're slipping up." The investigator responded, "Keep a close eye on all of them. Someone inside is involved. We're looking for any inconsistencies in access. We'll bring in more personnel if we have to. We can't afford to let this go on any longer." Jason's heart thudded in his chest. The investigators were closing in. They were on to something Jason hadn't expected to happen so soon. His perfectly orchestrated plan was unraveling, and the worst part was that he didn't know how they'd connected the dots. Jason knew that the game had changed. He couldn't afford to stay in the building any longer. The security measures had been tightened, and the investigation was too focused now. If he stayed, it was only a matter of time before they traced the irregularities back to him. He needed to disappear completely fast. The first step was to distance himself from the building. He couldn't risk returning to his shift or showing up for work. He needed to lay low. Fortunately, his life had always been low profile. He hadn't made any friends, had never gone out of his way to draw attention to himself. This would give him a better chance of slipping under the radar. But Jason couldn't leave completely empty-handed. The stolen goods were still at the safe house, and despite the growing risk, he knew they were his only chance to disappear for good. He had already planned to move the money and documents again, this time to a more secure location, one that was completely off the grid. The next few days were a blur of hurried preparations. Jason contacted his old network of contacts, people he knew who could help him launder the money through a series of increasingly complex transactions. He used burner phones and encrypted messages, ensuring that no trace could be linked back to him. His mind raced with the thought that any slip-up could be his undoing. On the night Jason moved the last of the money, he made sure the safe house was clear of any identifiable markers. He had used an alias to rent the apartment, and all his previous contacts had been left behind. This time, he was truly going underground. With the stolen money and documents securely hidden in a new, undisclosed location, Jason felt a momentary sense of relief. But the relief was short-lived. The internal pressure was mounting, and the external investigators weren't the only ones watching. Jason couldn't shake the nagging feeling that someone inside the building knew more than they were letting on. He had been careful, too careful, but the suspicion in Greg's voice and the way the investigators were circling made him realize that someone had started connecting the dots. It wasn't just about the missing money anymore. It was about a crack in the system, a flaw that someone inside had discovered, and now they were trying to find out who had exploited it. Jason knew that if he wanted to stay free, he would need to sever all connections to the building. The more time he spent in the city, the greater the chance someone would remember his face, recognize his behavior, and start piecing the puzzle together. He had to disappear completely. His next move was simple: leave the city. But even as he boarded the train that would take him out of town, Jason felt a lingering unease. The investigation was still in full swing, and although he had moved everything out of the safe house and out of sight, he knew that the longer he stayed in one place, the more likely it was he would get caught. As the train pulled away from the station, Jason allowed himself to relax for the first time since the heist. He could breathe a little easier. The stolen assets were secure, and the investigation was still a few steps behind him. But deep down, he knew this was only a temporary victory. His next move had to be even more careful. If he didn't keep moving, the walls would eventually close in on him. Jason stared out of the window, watching the city fade into the distance. The perfect heist had succeeded, but the perfect getaway, that was still to be written. Months passed after Jason's final escape. The city that had once felt like home was now just a distant memory. His name no longer appeared in news reports or police files. The stolen money and documents had been buried in layers of complexity, hidden away in untraceable offshore accounts and anonymous investments. Jason had erased every trace of himself. He had successfully vanished from the radar, living in complete anonymity. Jason had started a new life. He had assumed a new identity, one that allowed him to move freely without fear of being recognized. His past life, the one as a night watchman, was now a faded memory, locked away in a box he would never open again. The calm and quiet life he had once found so fulfilling now felt like a distant, almost irrelevant part of who he had become. Jason found a small coastal town where no one knew his name, no one asked questions, and no one cared about his past. He settled into a simple life, anonymously working in construction and spending his free time fishing or reading. He took long walks along the beach, staring out at the vast horizon, sometimes wondering if it was all worth it. The money was there, but there was a part of him that still felt empty, like a part of the thrill had dissipated the moment he walked away. Though Jason had successfully laundered the stolen money and ensured that the documents were safely sold, he couldn't shake the feeling that the investigation might still be ongoing. The company, he knew, wouldn't just let a breach of that magnitude slide. Even though they hadn't found a lead, they had the resources to keep searching, and Jason feared that they were still out there, hunting for answers. He had done everything in his power to cover his tracks, using fake identities, moving across borders, working with anonymous contacts. But the more time passed, the more Jason realized that the heist, as perfect as it had seemed at the time, had taken something from him that no amount of money could replace. He had made a clean escape, but he had left a piece of himself behind, the feeling that he was always just one step away from being caught. Jason's thoughts were often preoccupied with the past, but it wasn't just the heist that weighed on him. It was the price he had paid for his success.